Officially recording now, so we'll get started. Welcome to the final program for the Socialist and Marxist Studies series for the fall. And today we're going to be talking about the humanities as activism in Chicago. So very excited to hear all the speakers today joining us from there. Before we dive into the program itself, as I think is a good practice for these events hosted by University of Maine, I want to acknowledge the complicated issues surrounding the land on which the University of Maine sits. So the University of Maine recognizes that it is located on Marsh Island in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, the Micmac, through kinship alliances and diplomacy. The university also recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal and political entities with their own power of self-governance and self-determination. Okay, so I am Michael Swaha. I am a lecturer in the departments of English and Philosophy at University of Maine, and co-coordinating this with longtime coordinator Doug Allen, who will say a few things about the series in a minute. But before we get started, I also wanted to note a few technical things, since this is our first season, I guess you could say, on Zoom. So I am adding the website for the Socialist and Marxist Studies series in the chat window, and you should be able to find the recording for today's session along with the some of the other programs from this fall on there. And I should have today's session posted within a few days. I also wanted to note I've muted everyone, and everyone has the ability to unmute themselves as needed. So whether you're a speaker or participating in the Q&A later on, just unmute yourself as needed and sort of join in the conversation. But otherwise, let's keep ourselves muted so we don't have too much background noise. And again, we are recording today's session. And let's see, so Karen Sieber, who I'll introduce shortly, is going to be moderating today, and she will run the question and answer session, which will, I believe, happen after most of the speakers have gone. So let me turn things over to Doug Allen for a minute, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes? Did I unmute?
You're good, Doug.
I'm good. No, I did it. Okay, well, welcome, and especially welcome to our 3 Chicago humanities activists. I'm Doug Allen. I retired 2 months ago after 46 years as a professor of philosophy here at the University of Maine. And I had the honor of coordinating this Socialist and Marxist Studies series. We started in the mid-1980s, quite remarkable, and we've had over 600 programs. It wasn't clear because of the COVID-19 pandemic whether we'd have a series this fall, and we got a late start, but we have had 4 really good Zoom programs. And now we're in very good shape to plan the winter spring series, which will have more programs. I'd like to just acknowledge and thank the co-sponsors. The main sponsor from which the series gets its name is the Marxist and Socialist Studies interdisciplinary minor. Quite remarkable. We have a minor at the University of Maine with that name. And it's the main sponsor of our series. The new coordinator of that minor is Don Beath from philosophy. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the other co-sponsors, the Maine Peace Action Committee, which is mainly student focused. It's one of the oldest student peace and justice groups in the United States at any university. It's now in its 47th year. And the series is co-sponsored by the Division of Student Affairs on campus, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Department of Philosophy. Today's program, we're thankful, is sponsored by the McGillicuddy Humanities Center at the University of Maine. And Karen Sieber, who's humanities specialist at the McGillicuddy Center, proposed this program today and put it together. So I especially like to thank Karen. Finally, we're now organizing the spring series. If anyone would like to propose a program that you can do, or you know other people who can do it at the university, in the community, or even nationally and internationally, please send this to Michael Schwaha or to me, Doug Allen, and then working with others, we'll put together the spring series in the next month. Okay, with that, I'll turn it back to Michael.
All right, thanks, Doug. So I want to introduce our moderator for today. So Karen Sieber works as the humanities specialist for the McGillicuddy Humanities Center at the University of Maine. As a public historian, Sieber has consulted on a variety of projects nationwide, from museum exhibits to PBS programs. She is best known for her Rogue Archive, Visualizing the Red Summer, about the race riots of 1919 in Chicago and elsewhere, including Orono, which has evolved from an act of rebellion into the most used classroom tool on the subject nationwide. A former Chicagoan, she proposed this panel to me and Doug to highlight the ways in which humanists can use their craft as a form of activism, drawing attention to urgent issues like segregation, gentrification, and representation in ways that engage the general public. All right, so Karen, I'll turn it over to you, and I want to thank you and all the panelists for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for everyone being here. You know, I have to admit, I'm a little biased that Chicago is my favorite city. I may have grown up there, but I've lived all around the United States. I've been all around the world. Chicago truly is a humanities city. Everywhere you go, there's music, there's art. You wait for the L, there's a guy playing blues. You leave the L station and there's a great mural outside. You walk down the street and there's smells and sights and sounds. It's a city that's very much alive and has very much always celebrated the humanities. But it's also known as being an activist city. I mean, it is the city of riots, of protest. So I have been following the work of these three artists for a number of years, have had a few of them on panels before, or had the pleasure of sitting in on planning meetings and kind of seeing them with these early ideas. And so I really can't think of three better people to kind of highlight, to continue on the great work that others before them have done. You know, this is the city of Gwendolyn Brooks. This is the city of Vivian Meyer. This is the city of Sandra Cisneros. And so there's this ongoing work and kind of mentorship and inspiration that happens kind of generation to generation. And so, you know, these three artists not only have just some really incredible work of their own that they'll talk about, but I chose them in particular for the work that they do with youth, giving youth the tools and the power to find their own voice and to react to the world in their own unique ways. So I am going to read just a little bit about each of them to give you an introduction, and then I'm going to invite the guests to maybe spend 10 minutes or so each just talking about your work, and then we'll have a little chat among the four of us, and then at the end I'll open it up to a proper Q&A, because I'm sure you all will have questions as well. So I think we're going to go alphabetical here. So Kevin Coval is an Emmy-nominated award-winning poet and author of Everything Must Go, The Life and Death of an American Neighborhood, A People's History of Chicago, and over 10 other full-length collections, anthologies, and chapbooks. He is the founding editor of the BreakBeat Poets imprint on Haymarket Books. Coval is creative director of the MacArthur Award-winning cultural organization Young Chicago Authors. And founder of Louder Than a Bomb, which is now the world's largest youth poetry festival. It's in 19 cities across the world now, or North America. He can specify, but I know that it's kind of eternally growing. He has shared the stage with the Migos and Nelson Mandela. His work has been featured on The Daily Show, Poetry Magazine, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, and 4 seasons of HBO's Def Poetry Jam. In 2018, he was the recipient of the Studs Terkel Award. So I'm going to ask Kevin to maybe speak for 10 minutes, and then I'll introduce our other 2 panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and thank you for inviting us. Thank you for organizing this panel. And I'm really excited to be on the panel with these 2 in particular. And so, yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody, for organizing. And I too, am a Chicago centrist, so I am very biased. Although I will say the last 2 weeks, I've spent a good amount of time virtually in Maine, because last week I was doing a residency at the University of Maine at Augusta. And so I was on campus in a similar Zoom call all week with students, which was great. And so it's good to see everybody here. So I think a good place for me to begin is just to probably share a poem, and then to talk about how the interest in sharing and telling my own story kind of led me to wanting to listen and hear the stories of others, and use the tool of hip hop poetry or breakbeat poetry, or just writing and storytelling to actively do the work of trying to desegregate a city, because Chicago, as great as it is, it's also horrific in many ways too. It's a triumphant and also a terrible city at the same time. And so I'm going to read a poem that is about one of my most favorite places in the city at one of the best times of the year. Unfortunately, this summer, we missed some of this, but it's going, I think, in a new manuscript that I'm working on right now. So this is really probably my favorite, one of my favorite spaces in the city. It's called The Most Beautifulest Thing in this World, and it's after Keith Murray, ending on William Carlos Williams. The most beautifulest thing in this world is the lakefront at Foster Ave on a Saturday in July, when the high's in the mid-80s and the water's igloo cooler cold, which keeps no kid out and no family from packing a day's worth of fire and food and hand-portable tunes. The melting pot's a myth, because 100 countries show out today. Sand-colored kurtas, multi-patterned kaftans, Jordan jerseys, bikinis, and burqas. The world's outdone itself, and everyone's here, despite the city's insistent segregation, land, sky, and lake, where the maintenance of border and other is broken down. Afghanis play touch football long enough to become bros. Sudanese grill Hebrew Franks, and Latinx children are very much with their families. Ice has melted, except the paletas. The man who fused a refrigerator and bicycle together stands for 1,000 years. The sun's made his skin the color of tobacco, lines in his face, and the line for his cool, a canyon. A group of fully clothed women are unbothered in hijabs, dunking each other in refreshing water, aunties laughing and splashing like little girls. Ghanaian stews and charcoal feed the air and the heat, and children chase a soccer ball onto another patch of grass no one owns unless we all do. A mother has a moment, all to herself, while her 2 boys discover the porousness of land and lake. She sways, gazing at the horizon, the point where earth and sky miscegenate. Hands off development, hands off government, hands off displacement. Let us chill. Imagine what'll happen if we can't. Make the old warehouse a condo barn if you must, but leave the lake to the people. Let us sit here till sundown, till the giant Midwestern sky turns the whole place purple enough for a print show. Let us gather our kids and load up the car and scramble to Migos for an Italian ice in a baby cup. All of us deserved of something so sweet and so cold. And that's that piece. And yeah, like I said, it's about one of my favorite places in the city, the Foster Avenue Beach, which is one of the few, kind of integrated public spaces. Chicago is like I said, and like I'm sure my panelists will also touch on, one of the most segregated cities in the country, if not the world. And so part of our work, I think, as artists and as cultural architects and people who organize and educate, is to try to use the tools that we have access to in order to actively desegregate the city. I tell my students a lot that part of what we need in this moment and all moments is for artists to unfurl their radical imagination into the civic sphere. Certainly this moment has been imagined. You know, people have made viaducts and redlining and created boundaries and borders that keep us apart, have intentionally separated and segregated working people so we can't form a powerful center. And I think that the powerful, the elite, have every desire to keep working people from one another. And so part of the work that I've done is trying to take the ancient and old tools of storytelling and try to animate them in a new way for young people, particularly to go on this process of a theory of change. And the theory of change is long in some ways, but I think if you change the culture, you can change the politics, and if you change the politics, you change the policies. And the work that I've done, I started performing in Chicago as a kid. You know, I was in my late teens, early 20s, and started to organize and educate in my early 20s. You know, because I had a desire to find my own community, and it's you know, Louder Than a Bomb, which is a Chicago Youth Poetry Festival that brings together young people in teams in high schools, almost like basketball teams, but poets coming together to essentially kind of engage in a fun, competitive festival every spring. We're using this model of organizing, this model of educating, to not only transform the cultural experience of young people in the city, but as Karen alluded to, we've shared our model of pedagogy and education and organizing with cities around the globe. And so I want to play a little video just that will kind of be an insight into some of what we do pedagogically. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Yeah, okay, so let me know if you can't hear this, but I'm going to play it for y'all, and then I'll pass the mic here.
Young Chicago authors, our pedagogy is really rooted in the idea that every young person is already an expert in their own experience. And I think that is really important, especially in the context of educational spaces, other educational spaces where there's a lot of emphasis on what you don't know and what you have to memorize. We like to provide a space of kind of a democratic learning space where there's not a hierarchy, and we're kind of all learning from each other and kind of feeling connected through telling our stories.
When I was 16, I lost my best friend to a hit-and-run accident by a drunk police officer. And, you know, at the time, there was a lot of very raw emotions. It was a young black kid growing up on the south side of Chicago in one of the most segregated cities in the world. And so for me, I was always trying to look for some way to channel my aggression, channel my energy, channel just basic human emotions that I didn't have a grasp on. And coming to Young Chicago authors and Louder Than a Bomb, what they did was they just provided me with a very forgiving space to tell my stories and to be with people who were just like me, not like me, but we all had one thing in common, and that was this space, and it was poetry, and it was writing, and it was telling our story.
My name tastes like ebony, like dark, like the uncontrollable syllables of this uncomfortable language, like ebonics. My name look like dreadlocks, like a deadlock to society, look like eyes closed forever, like graveyard, like my mama's heavy sighs. See, my name look like movie, trailer, park, stop.
Part of what we do is use contemporary culture, contemporary poetics, and say that this also has great value and is in a tradition of poets that you might or might not be getting in your classroom.
After a workshop or after a semester is over, a teacher will say, wow, like this student never talked in my class and they're all about this poetry thing. So it can really kind of create a space for someone who really didn't feel agency in their education or even in just their experience in school, and transform it into something where they feel like it is their space and it is, you know, they're able to speak and kind of take up space and own space in a totally different way than they were before. Also, it with the kind of on the other side, like a student who maybe does, you know, is kind of like that class clown or that kind of like you know, has a very clear performative nature that just hasn't, you know, been harnessed yet, that can also provide a space for them to all the time kind of just come alive in that way too.
And so we stand in the footsteps and the legacies of Gwendolyn Brooks and Ida B. Wells and Studs Terkel and Hakeem Booty and Carl Sandburg and Carolyn Rogers and folks who came before us. We stand in that tradition and we add to that tradition, that the poetic tradition is not over. It's not on a museum wall that we can't touch, but it's very much alive, and it lives in our bodies, and it lives in our pen, and it lives in the voices of thousands of young people who consider themselves poets because of the work of young Chicago authors and Nada and Bond, and because of their courage to continue to articulate the world around them.
All right. So yeah, so that's, you know, a little bit of an insight into some of what we do, and some of what we do at Young Chicago Authors, and you know, like I said, I mean, this work really stems from my own desire to tell stories that weren't at the center of dominant discourse. You know, that a lot of this is about contesting the dominant narrative, the master narrative, and telling a more robust and radically democratic story about our city, because I think that's ultimately a way for us to have a broader sense of the conditions of the world and conditions of our neighbors. And I think, you know, ultimately through storytelling, through art making, through art sharing, you know, that is the invitation we need in order to build these small bridges that exist between a polity that is deeply divided. And so I believe, you know, very much in the prospect, the hope of the humanities to kind of be able to mend and build the bridges between us. I'll pass back to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You'll see a lot of parallels between these three artists' work. TonikaJohnson has been working for a number of years on this folded map project, which is how I first came across her work. She's a visual artist, photographer, and community activist from Chicago's South Side. She's from the Englewood community. Her folded map project addresses or kind of examines the long history of redlining and segregation in the city, and more so challenges some of these inaccurate perceptions that people have about the South and West sides of the city. She's co-founder of the Resident Association of Greater Englewood and lead co-founder of Englewood Arts Collective. In 2017, she was named a Chicagoan of the Year. And in 2019, she was named one of Field Foundation's Leaders for a New Chicago. She was recently appointed as a member of the Cultural Advisory Council of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events by the Chicago City Council. And so taking her skills to the city. And I think she's primarily going to talk about Folded Map today, but I'm hoping that she'll also mention a newer project that she's working on called Belonging.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. I try to pack in a lot, but of course I'm a visual artist, so everything is visual. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and just get right into it. All right, here we go. Well, first and foremost, just to kind of ground you all in the segregation that we're talking about in Chicago, I just want to let you know, oh, excuse the presentation, the word segregation is covered, but you get the picture. This is a map of Chicago and its segregation. So the pinkish purplish part of the map that you see, that's considered the north side of Chicago. And it is predominantly white. So all of the purplish pinkish that you see, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly white. The turquoise bluish that you see, that's the neighborhood, those are the neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. And majority of the larger portion of that at the bottom of the map is Chicago's South Side. And then in between the North and South Side, you have neighborhoods that are predominantly Latino, which are demonstrated by the orange color. And then you have another segment that is predominantly Black, smaller, and that's considered Chicago's, West Side. Then you have in the center, if you could really focus on and see it, it's a neon green. And it's also neon green speckled throughout the top. Those are the communities that are predominantly Asian. So when we say Chicago is segregated, this is what it looks like. And so my folded map project was literally an exploration into that. And not only are we segregated, but in each of those, on the north side and south side, we have streets that run 15, 18 miles that exist in the predominantly Black neighborhoods, as well as the predominantly white neighborhoods. So even though the neighborhoods are different, we have streets that we share that are the same. And so I discovered this phenomenon with the grid map with our streets when I was in high school. This is my high school, Lane Tech. It's one of the largest high school, Chicago public high schools in Chicago. It has a student body of a little over 4,000. And when I was going in the 90s, 93, obviously, there was no cell phone, no GPS. I'm sure most of you all know if you had to get to a destination, you had to learn maps. You had to know what streets where they were. And so this high school was in that pinkish purple part of the map, which was 15 miles away from my home neighborhood, which was in the blue part of the map. So every day I was making this commute and meeting people, kids from all around the city, from the entire Chicago map. So my everyday commute to high school was literally me going through Chicago's segregation. And then, to pull Kevin and Young Chicago Authors in, I was also in Young Chicago Authors when I was 13 years old. And this was the third year that Young Chicago Authors had gotten started. And that's actually the program that introduced me into photography. So it was through Young Chicago Authors that I actually was introduced to photography and got my first camera. But I mentioned that to say that also, in addition to commuting to high school every day, Monday through Friday, on Saturdays, I was going to Young Chicago Authors, which that commute was just as significant. It was over an hour. It wasn't all the way north, but it was in the middle part of this map. So every day for 4 years, my life was literally commuting outside of my neighborhood to these other neighborhoods and then meeting so many other amazing kids from around the city. And that's when I really understood how segregated our city was. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand how my commute to school, how my friendships was disrupting that. But I knew that it informed me about this city in a way that I was not going to experience otherwise. And so as I got older, I wanted to kind of amplify the issue of how segregation not only is a problem because of the disparity it creates due to racism, but how it impacts all of our lives, not just the communities that are neglected as a result of historic segregation, but also the predominantly white communities, how it's impacting them and their psychology and the stereotypes. So I really wanted to create a project that laid out very clear what segregation looked like in Chicago, but also what we can do on an individual level to dismantle it. And so I'm going to just play a clip of what Folded Map is and then get into the Map Twins.
This is a house on Chicago's south side in a predominantly Black neighborhood. This is a house at the same address on Chicago's north side in a predominantly white neighborhood. The photos are part of the Folded Map project by artist TonikaJohnson from Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. I'm sure the words you've heard to describe Englewood include Black, dangerous, poor, gun violence. However, Englewood is where I grew up. Johnson says she wanted to explore the effects of urban segregation and dispel notions that people should fear coming to her neighborhood.
Even though we struggle with issues of gun violence, it's not like soon as you step on any block, you're just gonna get shot potentially. Like, that's just not a reality, but that is literally what people think.
But what started as a project in 2017 focused on homes quickly turned into a project focused on the people in those homes.
It just naturally evolved into me one day asking one resident if they wanted to meet their map twin resident, and they said yes. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna have them talk about?
She decided to interview them together, posing at times uncomfortable questions such as how much they paid for their house. Jonathan Silverstein and his wife Paula Herman say it was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is really striking, you know, how lucky we are. And we certainly don't think of ourselves as living in a rich neighborhood, but compared to some, we are very privileged, yeah.
While their North Side neighborhood boasts a wide array of shops, restaurants, and food markets, their map twin, Maurice Perkins, says he needs to travel far just to find a grocery store.
They couldn't even imagine being in a community or a community not having the things that is, I guess, basic necessities.
And Perkins says they still stay in touch.
That was like a genuine connection. Right? It was like nothing forced or fake. We had a conversation, learn each other's differences in community.
Now Johnson is working to expand Folded Map, inspired to continue after the recent racial justice protests, and is convinced the only way to make progress is through relationship building.
And we need to know that it's going to be difficult. People are going to stumble and say stuff that isn't appropriate because we haven't had these conversations collectively as a large public. And that's why I'm really excited about Folded Maps, Map Twins interviews being a model of how awkward but necessary those conversations are.
The next iteration of Folded Map will include resources for people to help desegregate their own cities.
So that is Folded Map. The map twins that you met was Maurice, the young Black guy, and John and Paula, North Hermitage residents. And I'm just going to play for you a small, less than 1 minute clip of them when they first met. So long before, a year before you saw, a year before the video I just showed, the news story I just showed. So this is when they first met in the clip of them answering one of the questions I asked called, what's missing in your neighborhood?
I wouldn't mind seeing a theater over the alley. Maybe some type of center for the youth to kind of go hang out at or have some things that when they get out of school, or to be able to get exposed to different artistic options to just kind of give them something to do. Kind of like hanging outside and finding different ways or getting into trouble. But those trouble even being an option because to have nothing to do, of course, it's like trouble rate right over there. So,
I mean, I'm sure we could think of something, but yeah.
And so I'm going to wrap up the Folded Map part with just showing you the first map twins. Wade is the white male and Nanette is the Black woman. This is them on each other's porch, both in different neighborhoods, the North Side and the South Side, centering on my home neighborhood, Greater Inglewood. They were my first map twins. They've been the friends the longest. Well, they've maintained their relationship and they established a friendship and they've been friends for 3 years now. And on July 25th, they decided to expand the project themselves and create Block Twins. So I'm just going to show you a clip of what they did this year during the pandemic.
It's a concept that's been building for about 3 years. It started with TonikaJohnson's folded map project. My wife Jennifer and I were the first Northside map twins with our neighbor Nanette here on the 6100 block in South Bishop. And we've kept up the relationship for the last 3 years, and we've talked about, what we can do to build on it in order to close the gaps between the neighborhoods in Chicago with regard to social justice, economic equity, and what have you.
We started talking about putting a group together and somewhat modeling after Tonika's folded map. We decided that we wanted to do like block twins. We just want change on our block. We want to matter on our block. We're going to plant flower boxes at the corner, entering into the 6100 block on Bishop. Some of the elderly neighbors want flowers in front of their house, so we're going to dig up and put flowers in front of their houses. And we just coming together as a community from the north side and the community from the south side to bring one community together.
We're doing a beautification project just to get people from the north side and the south side together, working together to help beautify the block where the residents of this block want it to be beautified.
My hope is that we'll have broader conversations about how we can support one another, think about why our blocks are similar and different, and what are the systemic issues that might drive that difference. I'm so excited to see people from all walks of life and different neighborhoods come together to improve the block and make it a beautiful space.
To see it happen and to be a part of it happening in a place that I grew up in, a place that my aunt has lived for years, is a beautiful thing.
I'm gonna just cut off for the sake of time. And lastly, the Folded Map Project, because it's rooted in, my experience with the city as a teenager, quite naturally, I started to meet a lot of teenagers that were coming to the exhibition of Folded Map in 2018. When that's actually the time that I met Karen, when it was exhibited at Loyola University Museum of Art. And a lot of those teenagers were telling me that they did not necessarily travel all across the city, that they don't have a huge diverse friendship circle. And I just was stunned. And so I really wanted to dig into that a little deeper because it made complete sense. This generation of teenagers now are policed in a very different way than my age group was when we were teenagers in Chicago in the 90s. And so I wanted to capture their stories and their experiences of where they go in Chicago and how it makes them feel, and the incidents of being racially profiled, how that impacts them. So that's when I created Belonging, which documents the stories of 8 Black teenagers and 1 Latinx teenager about the locations in Chicago where they've been racially profiled. And it's a project that includes their audio stories of the incidents, as well as a photograph of them at the exact location. And just to give you a little idea, and this will be it, I'll pass it on. I'm just gonna play a short clip of the story of Lauren.
My name is Lauren Leggett. I am now 18 years old and I went to Providence St. High School. Lauren is a very passionate person who cares about people. He's a people person. I care a lot about little details and I see meaning in everything in life. But also driven and they know they will never have a dull moment with me because I'm so full of life. And yeah. I want to be an advocate for those who are disenfranchised. So like, I guess community organization, things of that nature. Further down the line, maybe even become senator, maybe president, who knows? The small things are like becoming an English professor and just things surrounded by the humanities. I experience being racially profiled in businesses and stores, I would say fairly often, depending on where I am, more so on the north side or near downtown a lot. If there's like upscale stores or really nice stores, I'll see like women who are working the floor, following me around, and constantly checking to see if I have everything I need. So the other day,
So for the sake of time, I'm going to end there. And if you would like to hear all of those stories and the rest of Lauren's story, you can go to belongingchicago.com. But thank you, and I'll pass it back to Karen.
Thank you so much. I wish we could go for hours today, really, and I'm sure that we easily could. Our third panelist today is Nicole Marroquin, and she's an interdisciplinary artist whose practice includes art making, collaboration, research, cultural production, and she works especially with youth and with the communities in Chicago and elsewhere. Her work has been exhibited both locally and internationally, including the Museo Nacional de Culturas Populares in Mexico City and the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. She's a member of the feminist collective Multiuso and a former Joan Mitchell Fellow at the Center for Racial Justice Innovation. She's the creator of Chicago Raza Research Consortium, a grassroots effort to map, gather, and present Mexican, Mexican-American, Chicano, Latinx, and Raza history in Chicago. She's Associate Professor of Art Education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And so this is my first time actually having Nicole on a panel, but I've been following her work, especially with her own kind of rogue archive and collection work that she's been doing with students. And so I'm excited to share with you some of her work. Thanks for joining, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go directly into my presentation. I'm going to set a little timer for myself because I want to get a little tiny video in there at the end. Here we go. And so I'm going to share with you some images of work that I make, and also probably a couple of projects from students who I work with. So right now, I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm working on. I'm making prints. But I get a lot of the ideas and the sort of the impetus comes from working, from the work that young people do, right? And so some of the big themes that I work with are, I think about schools as sites of social transformation, right? I'm a teacher educator and I observe student teachers. I drive all over the city and in circles, and I want to talk to Tonika about Schurz and Bowen school twins and stuff too, but another day. I also think about youth as public intellectuals and look at their cultural production and their scholarly production and think really seriously about the questions that they ask. In fact, the questions that they ask around some of the materials that I'm going to talk about are what sort of propelled the work that I was doing. This is a collage by a student from Benito Juarez. Another thing I'm really excited about is primary sources. I threw in this Inglewood 1933 school walkout because we're talking about Inglewood too. Interesting photo, right? I'm really interested in youth power and resistance movements and youth rebellion. And when I talk about oh, this one's really interesting, particularly because these are students walking out in solidarity with teachers. And, that's where the power is, right? So I think about the power being in the streets, and then I think about working towards theorizing youth resistance movements in Chicago. But I think that there's all sorts of ways of doing it, right? During the 2019 strike, I thought I was going to do rapid response ceramics, which is, you can't really do rapid ceramics, but I tried. Got it done within 2 weeks and I'm a former CTU member. I'm a K through 12 educator as well. And so my heart is always with the teachers. And so here I am thinking about resistance, right? How is knowledge produced? Where does it come from? Who's represented? Who isn't represented? And so I scour these photos I've been looking for, these photos that I find on eBay mostly. When they fired all the newspaper photo people, they sort of discarded bulk collections of photographs, and they were bought up by eBay and just sort of sold off. And I found this picture of a kindergartner's practicing for air raid practice. It looks like the active shooter drills a lot, but the expression on this young person's face really, it got my heart. So people questioning authority is sort of the theme, and we'll see throughout Chicago history, like the way I'm thinking about it is the way that youth are treated and disrespected, and the way our adultism is infused throughout this history is really apparent, and the extreme violence that the youth were responding to was then met with more. Waller High School is now known as Lincoln Park High School. And so one of the things that has that I'm working on right now is standing alongside the students at the Lozano Leadership Academy, which is a school that is really close to my house. I heard first about their protest about a year ago, and there's this quote from Samira: "Imagine how many younger kids came and didn't think that their history and culture was valuable because they didn't see it represented here." The Chicago History Museum has done, on the record, a pretty terrible job of representing Chicago Latinx history. And the young people at this high school said, you know what, we've had enough. And they started to protest, right? And so what they did was they forced this museum to say, okay, we're going to have this exhibition. And now the youth are involved in the process. They come to the meetings. I'm part of this group of elders that are supporting them in the process of the museum working on this exhibition, which is supposed to be like a comprehensive Latinx Chicago history exhibition. That's a tall order, but whenever people ask, well, what should be in this show? I say, well, look at these posters. They've already made the curriculum for us. Check it out. They got great ideas. And so on that note, I want to share a couple of other things that students I've worked with have done. I had the opportunity to work with Paulina Camacho, a really fantastic art educator who was teaching at Benito Juarez. And we were working with the students thinking about neighborhoods, right? Thinking about neighborhood history. And because this history really is like very undercooked in terms of like the volume of scholarship, where the information is coming from, when you get some histories of Latinx Chicago, it's just like all men, which is, that's not the history of Latinx Chicago. And so we were thinking about the neighborhood as the archive, right? We were saying, we asked like, who do you ask when you want to know about these histories? And we talked about the community as text because we were talking about the decimation of this archive through gentrification, right? With everybody being pushed out, it's sort of like giving out the books of the library one at a time. And that's what we started to lean in on, is this history. And just one of the projects we worked on was each student did a portrait of their own house, about 2 inches tall. I mean, over time, there was about 212 of them. And I think one of the big exciting moments for me and the young people I was working with over the course of a couple of years was to see this work all of their tiny houses on display next to ceramic work at the Jane Addams Hull House that was made, in the 20s and 30s. And the work at Jane Addams Hull House was largely made by immigrants to the West Side, which included a lot of Mexicans. And so here we have like a almost 100-year, it's about a 90-year Chicago Latinx ceramics tradition alone, right? Like just another lens through which to look at this. And on the other side was their proposals for future homes, how to retain the community, retain what is beloved to you in your neighborhood, if you were to redesign it. And so again, I work with really amazing people. I don't want to take credit. I'm a collaborator. I don't want to take credit for everything as if I did it by myself. So like I mentioned, Paulina Camacho is this brilliant art teacher, and we collaborated on a lot of these things. And then because she's such a fantastic teacher, she has an incredible relationship with all the students in her classes. So when I walk in, it's not like, I don't have to do a lot of the work to sort of gain the attention of the students. The students are like, oh, you're with her? I'm interested. And another thing I do is I'm really trying to work with as many of the people who were either participants or witnesses to the events that happened. Because relying on things like the Tribune to understand like a social movement in the 60s is really, it's not working. And one of the things I work on, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but one of the things I work on is the school uprisings that happened at Harrison High School, which is now, it's at 23rd in California if you're a Chicagoan. Now it's known as Salcedo or Tel Portugali. And then there was this other branch of the same school called Froebel that was at 21st and Damon. And that's just where the ninth graders went. Ninth graders who were Mexican. And so just one second on this school. In 1968, there was, I heard about this at a coffee shop. Like somebody was telling me these stories and I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And I was having trouble finding books about it. I found all these headlines of newspapers. Students in September of 68 started to have walkouts. I think a lot of the news of this was covered up because of the Democratic National Convention that had just happened. But this was a youth organized movement, right? And they were having walkouts every Monday. And in addition to that, like Harrison High School at the time was about 1,300 students were Black. And when you read about it, you read that the rest of the students were white. But until 1972, Mexicans were categorized as white by CPS, which is one way to, avoid discrimination lawsuits. Because at the time it was estimated that there was an 80% dropout rate among Mexicans. And so Black people were leading this movement, right? I came to find. This is a photo I found on eBay because there was nothing written about it. I couldn't find anything except for a dissertation written about it. And, and it's really great work, Dr. Dan's. But what the students were doing was really incredibly sophisticated here, right? Like this is the Black and Mexican students and Puerto Rican students too, sitting down to write manifestos and demands to the Board of Education in coalition, right? Like not trying to merge their ideas or come to a compromise. No, they're writing them separately and together. And this is the police coming into their lunchroom and attacking them. And it just so happens that the elementary school that is now housed inside of what was Harrison is where my children go. And so my children eat in this lunchroom. And so this was a really intense thing to come to realize that this had happened. That's my 7-minute warning, 8-minute warning. And so I was really excited to learn more about the student organizing, but I found this one article about this person, Sharon Matthews, and I started to wonder what her role was in this, right? She didn't seem to have a big role in the articles I read, but then I'd see pictures, and I'd think, doesn't she look like she's in charge? This is a march they did from Harrison, 23rd in California, all the way downtown, carrying this cardboard coffin, and then they smashed it. So it's a great performance, right? Well, I got to meet her. I put her in my art and I put it all over town and was talking about it all the time. And I just bumped into her at a show, and it's sort of been like the highlight of the research. in my life, to be honest, is to meet this person who, was in charge, ended up co-organizing a citywide movement, that ended up with what is estimated to be close to 60,000 students that marched out across the city and in the suburbs. And so I've created multiple iterations of this poster every time I talk to her, because I find out new information. She was interviewed by all these television shows. I finally found the article about when that happened. It's exciting. So what I'm trying to do now is make this augmented reality project where I can place these histories, like sort of this and other histories, back into the sites where they happen. And this is the current day Topolchkali and Salcedo lunchroom. And I wanted to try and figure out three-dimensional ways of putting this into the lunchroom. Anyways, that's something that I had to stop because of this ridiculous pandemic. I'm going to skip through this really quick and talk to y'all about, I guess like one of the really crucial elements and a big revelation to me was to actually bring some of these major figures in history into the classroom, and then also to be digging into like the newspaper articles that were written at the time and looking at these photos that were taken sometimes by Tribune or Sun-Times or Daily News photographers, and unpack that stuff with the young people, right? Like, is this sound like what actually happened? We read about the Froebel School uprisings, and then here we have Sandra Mendez, who was 12 years old the day of that event, and she talks about people being beaten within an inch of their lives by the police. These are parents peacefully protesting, marching in front of the school. And when the police attacked them, some of them, she says, she understood that they were unable to work after that. Some of them couldn't walk anymore because of their head injuries, and they had to return to Mexico. Like, this is the stuff that isn't in the news, but when she talks to the young people, it brought out this conversation from her. And also, too, the more I talk about it, the more things come out. This is a photo taken by a brown beret in front of Froebel protesting. This is just the very beginning of getting things that are not actually sourced from, major newspapers. This image of parents at Casaslan organizing. And so I guess this is probably where I'll just stop, unless maybe I have a second for it. Now I'll just stop here so we can have a conversation. But I was going to say, young people getting their hands on the primary sources, and so we just Xerox all the pictures and work with the students as they sort of make meaning out of it, and then ask me questions, and then I dig back in, and then I come back and I share with them. We've really built this together. And so, yeah, that's where I want to stop.
Well, thank you so much. I want to make sure that there is time for Q&A at the end. So I do have a number of questions that I would love to ask the panelists, but I think I'm going to narrow it down to 2 quick questions and then open it up to the group. And so the first is something I think about a lot. With the world being the dumpster fire that it is right now, how do you stay positive in your creative work and research? There's so much there's so much like anger that you could use as fuel, but I noticed that all 3 of your work it recognizes the issues with the cities, but it is very much still a love letter to the city. All 3 of your work it's acknowledging what's wrong with it, but it's very much in celebration of what the city is and its people and its communities and its diversity. So how do you, with everything going on in the world today, find a way to kind of fuel or take the fuel inside of you and use it for positive? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would just say that, for me, it's the response to my folded map project feeds me constantly. It motivates me constantly. I created a contact list for people to sign up to be a part of it, get updates. And to this day, it's over 600 people who signed up on that contact list. But what's more insane is that every one of them left comments on the form, like why it's important to them, like how this project has helped them think differently, how following me on Instagram has introduced them to other groups or people that they wouldn't, so I just use that as like motivation to combat the other truth that, there is a world of divisiveness. There are people who will take longer to understand the inequity in this world or to even comprehend systemic racism. And that's fine, because that's fine for me, because I know there's another large population who is continuing to be committed to a more equitable world. And no one is going to make me or try to convince me through the media or whatever that those people don't exist. I thought they didn't exist in my own city, and I've been to several neighborhoods, but the misperception is so strong that, racism and racists are dominating this world that, I even for a period believed before I started Folding Map that, people on the North Side, they don't care. And that's not the truth. That's just not the truth. Like, both things can be true at the same time. And so I just move with that. I just focus on the people who are committed to expanding their thinking and trying to heal and make the world better. That's all I focus on. And it's enough of us. It honestly is.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of two quotes. One is a quote from the poet Gary Schneider, who said that our job is to move the world a millionth of an inch. And so we have to keep in mind that we're, coming up against the, 2,000 years of colonialism, at least, and 400 years of American carceral capitalism. And so I think that we have to deconstruct and do the work of deconstructing this world. And I think optimism is an active politic and a political stance. I think pessimism is in some ways like, for the unimaginative. And I think the other thing is, the Public Enemy quote that I'm thinking of is their song "Don't Believe the Hype." That despite even looking at our blue and red states, I think that ultimately working people have very much in common, and that our job is to build small bridges between us. And I think we are able to do that work. I've seen that work time and time again. My dog is going wild in the background, by the way. I think she's a Public Enemy fan. I think that's why.
I'm not sure if it's because I was a middle school teacher, so I'm always like kind of really, trying to get everybody jazzed about stuff, but maybe it is really coming from like deep optimism. I always thought of myself as maybe a negative person because I was a young punk rock negative person, but you know what? Every day when I look at the young people, I see a reason to do stuff. Right. There's so many brilliant young people who are like just poised and just need somebody to like create opportunities or ask them what they think. And right, like that's what all this work I'm working on is for, us to get it to young people. And they just make me remember there's so much work to do. And I'm mad. I'm super mad. That's gas in my tank, though. It translates to me into this other kind of energy, I think. And I mean, people are frustrated. It's very frustrating situations, right? Especially looking at history when I'm like, wait, the people in 68 walked out because Benjamin Willis had written the Black history curriculum? How is that even possible? It's like, I mean, it's funny, right? Like that also keeps me going because I'm like, that's just, but talking about it with people, it's also, it's like very soothing to understand that there's like all of these layers of things that are causing this discomfort. I think walking around and not knowing the sources of things is really disempowering and hurtful. over time. I think people don't know that they have all these tools, right? Sometimes, and it's good to remember.
I think that's really, I just want to jump in, Karen, I'm sorry, but I think what Nicole said is very real. That one, I think it's because I think the three of us are around young people so often, you could kind of glean optimism and hope by just really paying attention to where what young people are doing, what they're thinking about, how they're talking. In Judaism, and I'm a Jew, I don't know how many Jews are in Maine, but at Passover, several, I see, okay, a few, thanks, Laura. I see during Pesach, we say that each generation reveals new freedoms. Right. And I think that we have to also be hopeful about the generations to come. Gen Z, for instance, has really, I think, for me, taught me that the binary is indeed dead. You know what I mean? Think about all of the work they're doing around erasing these, permeable boundaries around gender identity, and just to name a few. And so I think that we also have to kind of lean into what and be in tune with what where young people are at and what they're talking about.
Excellent, thank you. So many great points there. One last question, as we do have a lot of academics on this call, what do you three think that academics can take from the work of activists and bring it into the classroom? What do you think can be learned from kind of the immediacy and the reactionary nature of that type of humanities work, to bring that into the classroom and use that as a tool to engage not just students, but the general public?
I would say, using it to show the connectivity, just like Nicole said, students in 1968, what they were protesting about, that happened in high school that still exists, that in this lunchroom. And if you are a student or a person who learns that history, you can then start to imagine new possibilities. And it's important to know how that history is connected to you today in a very real way. So showing the activism that's going on now, showing why a region, a geography, a location, a group of people are feeling this type of way, using history to justify, and not even justify, but to actually demonstrate that this is the case. And then also helping them reflect on their own lives. Like, how has this also impacted you? Your life is constructed in a certain way because of all these things as well. It may not be the negative aspect, but it is still constructed in this way because of this particular history. So making those connections for students, for their reflection, is really important, because once they reflect and feel that connection, then, who knows what they might think of, who knows what solutions or deeper questions they might think of. And all of that is important when you're trying to, make a more equitable world. You have to explore the new possibilities of how things could be through history and how it's impacted your life.
Yeah, the binary is dead and borders are obsolete, so I think, like, the distinction between academic and the community, we have to blur those lines and invite the community onto campus and invite the campus into the community. And I think that, I think we can gain a lot from, I think, the models of city colleges, because that is a, robust, transient and commuter population of people who work and are also going to school. And I think to kind of reify the boundaries of the ivory tower is played. And so I think we need to break those borders down and do a lot of crossover between who is on our campus and who is in our community, and make people feel welcome in each space.
Yeah, and liberate all this material that's on these campuses, get it out to the young people. I was just batting ideas around with a buddy of mine the other day, where we propose radical things to each other. But if you think about it, it's not even that radical. That institutions that get public funding should also be producing scholarship for K through 12. I mean, you know, I feel like that wouldn't be too big of an ask. Because people really need that updated content. But also too, listening to young people. I feel like as if I've gotten into a couple of disputes with people a little bit over them just sort of being behind on a conversation that's happening on the internet. Like it's hard to tolerate a lot of social media sometimes, but people are really like the way we're talking about race and racism right now, the way that we're talking about gender identities now, the way that we're talking about like caring for ourselves and safety, like all this conversations, it's moving quickly, and it's led by young people, and it's like we gotta keep track of it and keep up on it because they're telling us what needs to happen as usual.
I think that's a good point. There's a term in public history called shared authority, and you'll often hear like oral historians using it, but it's recognizing the knowledge that underrepresented populations hold, that it is not this all-knowing academic that's kind of assigning tasks and information out to the world, that it very much is this symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, let me just one more quick tiny thing I wanted to say too is that then the results of learning these things and doing research and thinking about this is to make something, right? I think all three of us on the panel too were like, talk back to it, you know, do something and be part of it and generate your own maybe not scholarship, maybe art, maybe other things, culture, produce, you know, have the conversations, make it happen yourself, and don't just be like the on the receiving end. I thought I wanted to be a historian, but then I was like, I want to make other things.
I mean, history is very much a part of everything though, and that's probably one of the other reasons that I'm attracted to all three of your work, is that you all very much bring in the history of the city and its people and the complexity of the history into your work. Well, I'd like to open it up to the audience. I see there is one question already in the comments. It's a question for Nicole from Hugh Curran, wondering about the current protests that are happening in the city, whether the treatment by police has been as harsh as it was in the 60s, or have you noticed in your research a difference between police brutality then and now?
I would say probably any of my colleagues on this panel could probably answer this the same or answer this as well, because I haven't been out marching. I'm 50 and I have asthma, and I'm too afraid of getting. I'm terrified of going out. But the protests that happened around the Statue of Columbus were incredibly violent. The police targeted leaders. They beat elderly folks. They stole people's bicycles. And the video I saw that I stopped halfway through, it was shot by somebody I know, was terrifying. And to think it was around defending a statue. I had to be honest, I'd never even noticed that statue. I've never seen it. I've never walked up to it before. But what they did to these young people, I can't say a more or less, but that was unbelievable. And I think they're still killing people. So I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, I would say it's on par or worse. I mean, a lot of the students that we work with are on the front lines of this, you know, over the last 5 years of the, you know, kind of BLM uprising and resistance movement that's existed in the city. A lot of those young people have come from our spaces. And so, you know, we've had students who have been hit by police cars intentionally. We've had students shot at, we've had them beat, broken hands, limbs, bikes stolen, bikes used to hit young women in the face. You know, it does not stop, and it's in mass. I mean, I would say the one thing about 68 to now is that the police are much more militarized and operate more like the military, as opposed to just, you know, batons and their helmets. They now have, you know, military grade armament, and they use it.
Very true. It's been interesting for me to watch everything from afar on the news now after so many years of living in Chicago. Are there any other questions from the audience? I see Alex, I believe, has a question. Was that a hand signal of? Yeah, Alex, did you have a question? You're on mute.
You gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, I just want to say I'm a historian. I'm retired now. I taught for more than 30 years in the University of Maine. I taught European history, not American history, but obviously I followed also what happened here. And I wonder, I'm relating now to the previous question, to compare 68 to now. In other words, to compare the history to the present. And what I noticed over the years in lectures that I attended about racism in the United States, also about the conditions of women, is that there was an emphasis on how bad the situation now at present is. How little I would say almost how little progress was made. Okay? And I always thought to myself, and sometimes I expressed it, and sometimes I was met with some hostility, that if we emphasize that everything is so bad now, so what was the contribution of Martin Luther King? Okay, what was the contribution of all the great leaders of the 1950s and 60s, Rosa Parks, and you can say the same also about women, and all kinds of other oppressed groups. If the situation now, and again, I'm not denying that the situation, that there's a lot to correct. I mean, the brutality of the police is terrible, no doubt about this. But at the same time, if we take history, let's say of the last 100 years, the last 50 years, and we say, okay, here there was some progress, and we give credit to what happened in the 60s, and especially, Martin Luther King, to take an example. So then we have a little bit of perspective. We also provide some optimism that things can change, and things have changed. I mean, am I clear?
Yeah, I mean, that resonates, and I agree. I think obviously, we are saying now much more comfortably, even amongst white people, we are saying white supremacy. We are trying to deconstruct systemic injustices that have existed in the foundation of this country, and more white people than I've ever talked with before in my life are accepting the reality, but also like coming to wrestle with the terminology and coming to wrestle with the practices and the chronic practices. I think to your point, that we can't also though ask communities of color, and particularly Black folks in America, for patience. And if you are in a situation on the south or west side of Chicago, or if you are Black in America, you might be able to see to paraphrase King, like that long arc of justice, or that long arc of the universe bends towards justice, but you also know that you are getting your ass kicked now, and that is not progress. That's not progress from forced capture to enforced enslaved labor to now. And I think if you're a young person who sees, who's making these analogous connections, that history is not necessarily your friend. In fact, it is a burden that you carry, and it's a burden that you carry, frankly, I think, in your body. And so I think, history, I think it might be, it is a useful tool, but I also think we need to understand that there are realities that people face on the daily now, that history it doesn't do them any favor.
Yeah, maybe I say it a little bit too academically. However, if I may add, what was really very heartwarming to see in the demonstrations that happened in the last 2 or 3 months since George Floyd, how many white folks, young white folks participated in those demonstrations. It was not just blacks. And this is certainly very, very, you know, shows that there's room for optimism. And also the fact that you, Tonika, said, right, that there are people in the North Side that care about this. They care about.
Yeah, you know, that's part of the multi-layered, you know, change that has occurred, but the structural part has not. You know, just using my neighborhood as an example, Greater Inglewood, there has been no improvement. It's only been a decline. Our home ownership from the 50s and 60s for the Black people who migrated to Chicago in an effort to move into the middle class, they were not able to own their homes because of legalized theft due to land sale contracts, redlining, everything. As a result, my neighborhood is what it is today, which is a neighborhood struggling with gun violence, 15 to 18 closed schools, no business corridor, none of that. So in our eyes, in my eyes, it has not improved. There's aspects that has actually become even more systemically difficult to make progress. And so it has aspects of where we're at with this has changed and improved so far as the overt nature of it, but it has become more covert. You know, people talk about, oh, you know, Black people should, you know, buy more homes in their neighborhoods. Well, we have actually tried to do that, but there's been systemic barriers as a result of that. So there's different kinds of structural racism now than it was before that create the same disparities that existed decades ago. There's no reason for me to understand why a group of students in 1968 would protest. But I do without even having, you know, being a history student, without, you know, I get it. I get that plight. I get the plight of immigrant families who come here and the cost of citizenship is ridiculous. The bureaucratic paperwork barrier that makes it very difficult for them to become citizens. Like, I get it. And I get it because of what still exists, the disparities, the inequities that still exist. So even though we've made progress, there are very explicit structural aspects that has not, and it's actually gotten worse. And that's why I love Chicago for the good and the bad, because it demonstrates all of those complexities, the progress, as well as the continual systemic issues. And we are constantly, through decade after decade, creating and organizing to resolve it, you know, in ways that other parts of our country probably hasn't thought of, because we've been dealing with it for so long continually. So, you know, we have made progress, but there are very obvious aspects that have gotten worse.
Yeah, Doug.
Okay, so thank you for your 3 really very powerful presentations. And what I want to ask you is, the major focus, I think, in all 3 was very much on young people, and often in terms of individual change and small group change, and listening and learning from what young people are saying and so forth. So my question was, when it comes to trying to, for the young people, to make the connection between their individual or small group kind of experiences and understanding, and some kind of integral understanding of how that's related to larger systemic and structural and so forth, economic and cultural and political and so forth framework, does that have to come totally from those young individuals, or do the three of you attempt to engage young people in ways that kind of raise, it's kind of a catalyst for them then to kind of develop and broaden their understanding?
I was gonna say that I think all three of us engage young people in a bunch of different ways, right? Like the events, and it's like making, creating opportunities to see the world that we want, like having young people participate in things that are sometimes just seen as like the realm of the adults, or creating opportunities for like socializing, face to face, and making human being connections is like the new technology, right? And we're all missing it right now, aren't we? um, and yeah, I think that it's kind of a multi-pronged approach in my case. I go in and in this one case, I go in and I visit with this teacher, and then I bring in somebody, and then I bring in an elder, and I bring in a younger artist, and then we all sort of, and then the production of the work is this whole other part of being in the world, right? Like they produce images that then we show to other people, or then it, I get it, I put something, try to get something into a magazine, or and then they're starting to circulate in a different way. I mean, it's a lot of it is breaking down these walls between adults and non-adults. The way that we categorize people is pretty weird, right? Because a lot of them are like ready to go now, and some of them just want to hang out on the side, and we'll see what they do. I mean, everybody doesn't have to participate in just one way, but I think creating more opportunities to allow people to have different roles and be together is one of the ways that it grows their understanding of like this longer trajectory. But also like intergenerational dialogues are crucial, definitely crucial.
Yeah, and I think all of our spaces are politicizing spaces. Some of the work that we're engaged in is specifically around an aesthetic of realist working class portraiture, and so it's about young people representing the stories around them. But once you bring those stories, to Nicole's point, once you bring those stories in communion with one another, then you get to hear and see people who look like you in some instances, and people who come from very different walks of life. And I think once we do the work of actively desegregating a city, you begin to understand what kind of inequity there is across the city itself. And I think that is a politicizing force that causes people to ask really imperative questions about why. And then if they remain engaged in that community, if they remain engaged in that process, then I think it leads them to all sorts of pathways toward organizing and justice work.
Well, thank you very much. Michael, I'm assuming it's somewhat time to wrap up here. I know that some people have been dropping off and have classes to get to and things.
Yeah, I mean, for those that can't stick around, if the speakers can, I just had one more question, that's just kind of following up with what Kevin and Nicole were just saying. When I think of the humanities, I think of one of the fundamental characteristics of studying it is to think about how we relate to each other as humans. And so I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about any kinds of new ways of relating that people in your organizations and the circles that you're working with and so on, the spaces that you're working with, if you see any sort of new forms of relating, whether it's just a single person to another single person, or as kinds of groups relationality or things like that, that are sort of working outside of or against or overcoming the kinds of relationships that are the sort of dominant, oppressive kinds of relationships that are part of our history, right? What kinds of new and exciting ways of connecting with people do you guys see happening here? Nicole, Kevin, and Tonika, I'm real curious about that.
I would say, my observation in Chicago, our arts scene culture has always been thriving and has always been, you know, a space where integration and connectivity has occurred. But sometimes it's not as visible to people. And I think this year in particular, the larger public is aware of how people are connecting through shared passions. Just to use something silly as an example, this is why I love the universality of astrological signs, of, just because, and personality tests, because beyond race, there are so many ways that we can connect to individuals, through your shared passion, through arts, people who are music lovers, especially in Chicago, people who have a shared passion for blues. They cross so many racial divides because of their shared love for blues, for poetry, for photography, and back to the reference of astrological signs, that's a way to connect, but not to minimize the importance of this time. I just have seen a real huge awareness and acceptance of people using the arts as a tool for connectivity and understanding these large, complex issues. And art is so expansive, it can include so much that I feel it's definitely been a new way, not a new, but a more critical way now than ever for people to find different ways to connect to people.
Yeah, I mean, a hammer can be used to bond or bash, right? And so I think all the social media, I think, the connectivity through social media is proven to be very important in the lives of young people, both in terms of a social mechanism to convene, but also as a way to organize politically. I mean, I think that there are a lot of very skilled, very smart young people who are circumnavigating the inquiries from police in order to continue to assemble people in the streets and be steps ahead of the police. And also just, I think, like, in terms of the new ways in the last 10 years, I think the power of the group chat as a site to text your close associate of homies and be able to laugh and turn up and mourn and just share, even if you can't be together. I think the phone can distract us, obviously, but it does have the power to connect us too.
Just to throw a little tidbit in there,
technology, what we're doing right now. Zoom has definitely been used to connect.
It's so beautiful. It's incredible to be able to just jump into a talk and visit with people all over the place. There's something really weird happening right now in the arts around history, and artists are all in the archives. If any of y'all have noticed, we're in there doing drifts, wandering around. People say, "What can I pull for you?" We go, "I don't know yet. Something red." We're, and in combination with augmented reality, right? This is where things start to get exciting to me, right? Where digital humanities are just starting to become like this mode in which people are able to experience things in a way that's really thrilling and visceral and now and also safe, to be honest. And I'm really excited, except again, let me make my pitch for centering the knowledge of young people. If you've ever been like, crap, I can't, oh, my phone, and you had to call someone, I have my own personal human teenager that I made, so I ask her all the time to help me with things. I don't know where I'd be without it, explain this meme to me, and things like that. But like having young people have the information and the excitement around history so that this can start to push it forward, right? They're going to be, as soon as they get their hands on this and are able to run with it, I think we're going to be able to walk around and see all the layers out here. I mean, that's sort of my fantasy, but I don't think it's that far off.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for you three joining today. I've been looking at comments of people that had to leave early, and there's definitely a lot of people that have been inspired by your work. And I'm hoping that people will use that inspiration to find ways of creating their own work. You know, so much of the humanities takes forever. Book proposals and grant writing, and you know, if you want to get a show up, it might take like 1.5 years. If you want to get a chapbook published, it's going to take a while. But there is this power of the humanities to be able to react instantly still. And I think technology and digital humanities is a big part of that. That you can take a photograph that reacts to the world and then share it with the world instantaneously. That you can create a breakbeat poem for $0 and share it to the world. That things don't have to be these difficult, long-term concerted efforts, that there's these really quick, easy ways that are accessible to everybody now because of technology, of sharing your creative projects with the world. And so I think that's just so exciting for me to see what kids are coming up with, even how they're using TikTok to educate people about you know, the culture of their ancestors or about the history of a particular area. So I think again, looking to the youth and seeing what's important to them, how they're using their voice, how they're finding to what tools they're using to reach their peers. You know, I think there's just, I'm excited for where the humanities are going. And I think each of your three careers really kind of speak to the possibilities of the humanities as activism. So really, again, thank you so much for bringing a little bit of Chicago to Maine today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
So much for setting this up. This is awesome.
Yes.
Congratulations, Doug, on retiring too.